You may or may not have heard about this watch before, but it is something terrific. The Vacheron Constantin Dual Time prototype, which I will just call the Vacheron Everest. Now, for a bit of background to this watch and the story, it was a piece unique model made for Cory Richards, who is a National Geographic photographer who specializes in climbing mountains. He has had a partnership with Vacheron for a long period of time and is often seen wearing overseas models. In fact, this is how I found him and his work a long time ago. Saw that he was sponsored by Vacheron and found it to be quite the interesting partnership. Now, this man really enjoys climbing Everest. He's done it at least 3 or 4 times already, but not all of them have been successful. This specific overseas was created to be used by him as he attempted to summit Everest using a different route. And if I'm not mistaken, he never managed to reach the summit using this route because of weather conditions. But the development and the whole concept of this watch is an amazing story because we simply don't see one-off prototypes nowadays. Now, what makes this watch so exciting? First off, I think before even addressing the design detailing, it's highlighting that it is a Vacheron overseas. Now, where does the overseas lie in comparison to all of the other watches on the market? It lies very neatly in between the Royal Oak and the Nautilus. What's amazing is that even though it is a 3rd generation watch from the family, it's a model that competes directly with 2 pieces that have been around since the 70s. And talking strictly from a design point of view and the whole idea of developmental history, it's very impressive when you can say that your watch, your fairly new generation of watch, now lines up directly with these 2 classics. But here's the thing. When we're talking about AP, Vacheron, Patek, we're talking about high horology. We're talking about the Holy Trinity. These watches all have made history in their own rights. And just when we look at the watchmaking and the movements that go into these pieces, many people would wear them sparingly, treat them with respect, not use them to climb up mountains with. Before even looking into the design inspirations, it's talking about a watch that uses a movement, an extremely high quality caliber, that is never advertised about having shock-absorbing bridges, silicone balance springs, anti-magnetic properties. Instead, most people wear these watches with care. But then it's seeing this configuration and all of a sudden it keeps you thinking. This brand has a lot more to offer than just something attractive. So if we just focus on the movement, I think one of the best details is the engraving of Everest on the rotor. And again, I will say that this is a once-off. It's very subtle. And when we look at the center of the rotor, it looks to be either a compass or a sun, possibly rising. Just that level of attention to detail is something quite commendable. But then we get to the overall design of the watch, the real aesthetics. What makes it so attractive? The use of the 70s inspired orange highlights. The idea of a fabric strap that is connected to this integrated case. How the matte dial has an excellent texture behind it. The bezel, which, as we know, corresponds directly with the Maltese cross. As a package, it looks very exciting. It looks like an adventurer's watch. Then we focus in a bit more on the details and those orange highlights. We see that the 2 hands, the AM/PM indicator and the GMT hand, are both loomed and kept the same color in orange. And the secondary crown, which is located at the 4 o'clock position, also has a small orange arrow. If I'm not mistaken, this watch was also made fully out of titanium. And it's just thinking that this piece is sold and marketed as a dress watch that can be worn more casually, since Vacheron ships their watches with leather straps and rubber straps. But seeing this composition of elements, this use of different materials, all of a sudden changes its stance completely. Now we have something that looks like it could take on anything that's thrown at it. So where could we say that this watch gets its inspirations from? I would imagine that the 1655 Explorer played a big role in the development process, and just the thought. There are many other watches that used similar highlights back in the day, but I think the broad arrow hand is what really speaks to that reference in particular. And even though it appears more like a sports watch, you look at the date wheel as a subdial and can see where it adopts the more high horology side of things. I think what would have made the design of the dial a bit more effective would be some kind of 24-hour ring that would be integrated around the chapter ring. As we see now, it is just simply a layout from 5 minutes all the way up to 60 minutes. But it would probably be more effective if you had your hours laid out there instead, which would essentially improve the GMT hand reading time. Now, this watch received a lot of attention a few months back because it was auctioned by Phillips. Why Cory didn't keep this watch for the rest of his life, I do not know. Not only is it a one-off prototype from the family, but it is such a heavy hitter. So it goes to show that sometimes prototypes can be extremely effective. And if Vacheron is thinking, maybe they could bring out a model like this for the mass market. The one factor that I really enjoy about this watch in particular is that even though the name Vacheron Constantin sits in line with AP and Patek, and this watch very much lines up with the Royal Oak and the Nautilus, seeing it in this configuration, with all of these experimental materials and a much more substantial movement, it's a high horology watch that could be used in any environment. And with a few minor changes, it has turned into a completely different animal. So in closing, how does this watch best epitomize its environment, the one that it is going into? I think the dial plays a big role in that equation. The use of texture on the dial gives you that impression that it is going to be used on rocks, on hard ground, on snow. The simple, beautiful, and effective idea of commemorating this whole expedition by engraving the Everest landscape on the rotor is a nice touch. And what really drives it home then is the use of accents and highlights that makes this particular watch transition from the formal to the active. Great watch. One of the most interesting prototypes we have seen in a long time. One that comes from an extremely prestigious name and a working prototype that withstood the environment it was thrown into.